And hi 4S, yay. So here we have our third plenary, Black Technoscience. I'm Beth Coleman, and it is my honor to introduce our speakers for today. Okay, so I just want to set the stage a little bit. In considering Black Technoscience, in the spirit of good relations, the theme of this 4S gathering, I speak with gratitude of the fiery, clear path our plenary speakers have opened for us. So first, let us address Black Technoscience as a qualifier, or I would suggest an augmentation. Black has served historically as a signifier of periphery, minoritarian, adjacency, and unconditional and reflexive in relationship to a normative position of white, masculinist, liberal subject. In thinking of Black Technoscience, as distinctly evidenced in the work of Ruha Benjamin and Timnit Gebru, we reorder a narrative of debt and deficit toward one of generativity and beauty. So I would like to cite the framework of Black Technoscience, citing the work of Nicole Charles and Omi Dryden, who organized a technoscience salon of that title, Black Technoscience, here in 2018 and 2019, with the collaboration of Kristen Boss and Michelle Murphy. So Black Technoscience, signifying a simultaneous disruption to and opening up of technoscience, Black Technoscience here engages with the rich body of aesthetic, artistic, and scholarly work on Blackness, science, technology, material cultures, health, consent, and ethics, both within North America and throughout the African diaspora. So one of the generous aspects of Benjamin and Gebru's work from SDS and AI, machine learning, or deep learning disciplinary views is how they're so wonderfully intertwined. In the reconstruction of margin to center, the minority view is now relegated to some bad, or in this case, good Spielberg dark fiction, as Black is strongly reconstituted as a critical key to unlock the biopower apparatus that constituted center and periphery. As evidence in Benjamin's seminal work, Race After Technology, and this is part of a large corpus, and the path-breaking publications from Gebru on ethical data annotation and machine vision. For example, data sets for data sheets has essentially created a whole new category in the NeurIPS conference. Their work has disrupted the mainframe. Here we see how systemic valuations embedded and obscured, made opaque to the point of crazy making, or to making us broke, or to making us dead, have placed certain peoples in the margins of the socio-technological matrix. So engaging in my own recursive Black Technoscience logics here, I quote Timnit quoting Ruha to launch this plenary. So in Timnit's talk in April 2021, Hierarchies of Knowledge in Machine Learning and Related Fields and Its Consequences, a profound and deep read of the whole system, Timnit quotes Ruha's speech to this effect: an ahistoric and asocial approach to deep learning can capture and contain, can harm people. A historically and sociologically grounded approach can open up possibilities. It can create new settings, it can encode new values, and build on critical intellectual traditions that have continually developed insights and strategies grounded in justice. My hope is we all find ways to build on that tradition, and I do believe that is what we've gathered to do today. I would also like to hail Kim Tallbear's and the participants in yesterday's plenary, the avatars of Indigenous and Black intervention, in thinking about the global death drive and literally how Whitey is on the moon. So now I move to the formal bios of Dr. Ruha Benjamin and Dr. Timnit Gebru. Ruha Benjamin is Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, founding director of the Ida B. Wells Justice Data Lab, and author of the award-winning book, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, among other publications. Her work investigates the social dimensions of science, medicine, and technology with a focus on the relationship between innovation and inequality, health and justice, knowledge and power. Dr. Timnit Gebru was fired by Google in December 2020 for raising issues of discrimination in the workplace. Prior to that, she was co-lead of the ethical AI research team at Google. She received her PhD from the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, studying computer vision under Fei-Fei Li, and did a postdoc at Microsoft Research in New York City in the FATE, Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics in AI group, where she studied algorithmic bias and the ethical implications underlying projects aiming to gain insight from data. Timnit also co-founded Black in AI, a nonprofit that works to increase the presence, inclusion, visibility, and health of Black people in the field of AI. She's currently setting up an independent AI research institute. Okay, that is fire. So let's, we're gonna have Ruha speak, Timnit speak, and then there will be conversation, and then there will be opportunity for question and answer. So I pass it over to them.
So I want to preface this by saying thank you for inviting me here. I might be trying to cram way too much into this 20 minutes, but I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today. And I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and I'm of Eritrean descent. And there is something really, really horrible that is going on there right now. And I just can't not talk about that. So what I wanted to do was to talk about the things I'm worried about right now, but use and kind of connect it to the paper I wrote that ostensibly got me fired from Google. And it was, I co-authored it with 6 other people, but many of them, so Mark, Vinod, Ben, and Meg were not able to, they were told not to have their names on the paper, so it ended up being 3 of us. And so I want to talk a little bit about some concepts in the paper that I wrote. So first of all, what are large language models? And so large language models are a type of language technology that are trained on lots and lots of data, and specifically data from the internet. So what all these works do is they crawl data from the internet. They use basically like the whole World Wide Web most of the time. And these models are used for lots of different things. So if you look at machine translation, you want to translate from one language to another using these machine translation tools like Google Translate, they're used there. If you have this auto completion stuff on your email, they're used there. There's probably stuff that I'm forgetting, but they're search. So to rank queries, etc., they're used there. So I wanted to write this paper because I saw this race, like the people were trying to develop larger and larger language models, and they were super excited about it. And what we wanted to do was get them to stop and slow down for a second. And so some of the key points that we talked about are some of the potential issues in large language models. So we talk about the environmental and financial cost. We talk about unfathomable training data. That means what happens when your training data is so large. And so, for example, we give an example about how size doesn't guarantee diversity. It might be super obvious for people here, but for our audience, for the people who were developing these large language models, they write as if having just encoding the World Wide Web somehow gives you a lot of diversity, diverse views of opinions. That's how they talk. So this is an excerpt from our paper. We say, furthermore, while user-generated content sites like Reddit, Twitter, and Wikipedia present themselves as open and accessible to anyone, there are structural factors, including moderation practices, which make them less welcoming to marginalized populations. So Reddit, Twitter, Wikipedia, that kind of data is usually what's used in training these large language models. So and this is also an excerpt from our paper. So we say the net result is that a limited set of subpopulations can continue to easily add data, sharing their thoughts and developing platforms that are inclusive of their worldviews. This systemic pattern in turn worsens diversity and inclusion within the internet-based communication, creating a feedback loop that lessens the impact of data from underrepresented populations. So again, we're talking about the training data for these large language models. So this is again another excerpt from the paper, but I'm not going to go through this again because I'm trying to cram too much in 20 minutes. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to show a couple of examples of who benefits from large language models and who pays the cost. And a lot of what I'll spend time on is probably the platforms used for training as training data for these large language models. So on December 2nd, when I got fired from Google, I was taking a break from driving across the country. And the thing I was really stressed out about was escalating war in Ethiopia. That's where I'm from. I left Ethiopia in 1998 because of a war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And fast forward to now, the same entities involved. There is another war with Eritrea involved in Ethiopia. So I was extremely stressed out because I was seeing what was going on in these social media platforms. So this is Ethiopia. There is a huge war that started in this northern region of Ethiopia and Tigray. And like I said, I'm of Eritrean descent. So my parents were born and raised in Eritrea, which is a country north of Ethiopia. So let's look at large language models. One of the things that large language models are used for is, for example, detecting toxic speech or hate speech or something. So like if you have, if there's some article or something, you have comments, they can try to use it to flag some of these comments as toxic versus not automatically, etc. So in terms of the languages that large language models kind of work with, right? If you look at what languages are supported, virtually none of the Ethiopian languages are supported except for 2. And really no Eritrean languages, or like, for example, Tigrinya, which is one of the national languages of Eritrea, and also spoken in Tigray, which is, this region that is currently under siege. So the war was declared on November 3rd. Let's look at what was happening on these platforms that are used as training data for large language models. So again, the content that's generated from platforms like Reddit, Twitter, etc., is used as training data for these large language models. First of all, there was a lot of misinformation that was going completely unfettered, completely. On the other hand, around the same time, I see this person, Jan LeCun, who says, social media would be guilty if it amplified hate speech and calls to violence. The reason I'm bringing him up is because he is one of the pioneers, quote unquote, of deep learning. He got the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Computer Science, the Turing Award, and he is currently very high up at Facebook. He started the AI lab at Facebook. So I'm seeing what's happening in the war and how hate speech is being amplified on social media. He's coming out and saying like, oh, hate speech does not amplify calls to violence. And he also says, 94% of hate speech is taken down automatically by AI. So, okay, what, right? So right now, September 28, 2021, one single post on Facebook galvanized people to commit violence against a specific community. That's September 28, 2021. This is an article from like 2 days ago, right? So to be where I'm from, every single day we're hearing news about thousands of people starving, thousands of people dead, thousands of people, refugees unaccounted for. I mean, like literally, this is the kind of news we're hearing every single day. And of course, we know all of, we've already heard so much about Facebook's role in Myanmar. So this is another excerpt from our paper. We say, again, the net result is that a limited set of populations can continue to easily add data, sharing their thoughts and developing platforms that are inclusive of their worldviews. So many Ethiopian and Eritrean journalists have completely given up on Facebook, so they migrated to Twitter. And Twitter is still very bad. So here is examples of these fake accounts. So these images are completely fake. They're using what's called generative adversarial networks. So they're generated using the equivalent of a large language model, but for images. So they're generating these completely fake images. So this one example, George Bolton, he pretended to be a diplomat on Facebook, on Twitter, and fake person, fake account, writing fake stuff that was basically proliferated like by 1 million people, etc., etc. Nothing. They did nothing about this kind of stuff. This is just another example of all of these fake accounts with fake images that are operating on Twitter. And so journalists like this guy, like Zacharias, are put on a list to be hacked and attacked. And every time they write an article, every time they write something, there's always a flood of fake accounts or other paid people responding and harassing them. There are people with burner accounts that send death threats. In general, there's just a proliferation of fake news in addition to targeted harassment. So there's a lot of research and headlines on harassment against journalists on social media. So going back to me, and when I wrote this paper, my team at Google, we were from a lot of different places. And about 2 weeks before I got fired, I had hired this guy, Al-Mahdi Al-Mahamdi. He's a Moroccan living in Paris now, or was Switzerland before. He co-founded a media outlet in Morocco before working on his PhD in computer science. So he's a theoretical computer scientist, but before that, he was a journalist in Morocco. So that's why I wanted him to be in my team, because he was also very worried about, social media, misinformation, etc. A lot of his friends are currently jailed and harassed in Morocco, like many other places. And those who advocate on journalists like Omar Radi are similarly harassed and intimidated. And one of the ways, of course, that this is done is through a lot of coordinated activity on social media. So Mahdi received lots of death threats all the time. So here's one example in Moroccan Arabic, right? It says, if you cross the lines, your existence ends. And every time he reports these death threats, it says, it doesn't violate their terms of service. So anyways, I gave a keynote like last year, and I gave this as an example. And the next day, it was this account was suspended the next day. And so he's saying, it shouldn't take a keynote or something for this one account to be suspended after death threats, right? So how are we supposed to believe that these companies have a handle on anything? Imagine the people who are not visible, etc. So this is from February 2021, coordinated inauthentic behavior report from Facebook. They talk about removing 385 Facebook accounts from Morocco that were inauthentic. And research from people that I know who are not going to disclose their names now because they're worried about their safety, they say, it's more like 15,000 accounts. So even when Facebook says that they did the research and removed these 385 inauthentic accounts, it's so much lower than the actual number, right, which is much closer to 15,000. And these accounts are suppressing people's voices. People give up and leave the platforms. People like journalists, people who are trying to like this is an example of how they're engaging in propaganda of from King Mohammed, and also the head of intelligence who's accused of torture by a lot of Moroccans. There's a lot of different examples here that I can't show because we don't have so much time. So again, we write in our paper that, there's been multiple cases where people on the receiving end of death threats on Twitter have had their accounts suspended, the ones on the receiving end of death threats, while the accounts issuing the death threats persist. So we were writing about this because, again, this is the data that's used to train these large language models that are used everywhere. Harassment on Twitter is experienced by a wide range of overlapping groups, including domestic abuse victims, sex workers, trans people, queer people, immigrants, medical patients, neurodivergent people, and visibly or vocally disabled people. So again, Jan LeCun says 94% of hate speech is taken down automatically by AI, and we know this is absolutely not true. For one, content moderation has a lot of issues, and so actually my former teammate Alex Hanna and Maliha Ahmed have this very short 20-minute or so talk about content moderation. Maliha Ahmed used to be a content moderator. But in addition to these issues, these companies are also infiltrated in many ways. So here is one example from the UAE, where Twitter bots have been implicated in crimes, such as the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. And British newspaper Metro revealed that a Saudi journalist had died under torture in his country after Twitter's Dubai office allegedly disclosed his identity to the kingdom's authorities. So the journalist allegedly ran a Twitter account which exposed human rights violations by Saudi authorities and royals. And he was arrested and then died while being tortured in detention. So they allegedly got, Saudi authorities were able to identify him thanks to information shared by Twitter's Dubai office, which was accused of involvement in spying on the accounts of Saudi dissidents. So again, this is the training data used for large language models. So there's various forms of abusive language, harassment, etc. And in return, work on these large language models does not focus on any of the countries, languages, or people for which these platforms are caused so many of the aforementioned issues. So when I spoke up against the war in Tigray, I was similarly harassed, and I saw the same flood of comments by fake accounts, coordinated attacks, etc. And this was the same as when I got fired by Google too. There was a lot of harassment, coordinated accounts, coordinated attacks, etc. Day in and day out. And this is Haben Gurma. She's a disability rights advocate. She wrote her memoir, which I suggest that everybody reads it. She also says that never in her life has so many people attempted to crush her voice when she spoke up against the war on Tigray. So many people like this would just either give up and stop talking because the threats are real. Some people get real threats to their homes and leave these platforms, and then the remaining voices are the voices, the dominant voices, amplifying hate speech, etc. And then that in turn is what is used as training data for these models that are used everywhere. So this is this is an excerpt from our paper, which is similarly what I just said. So finally, I want to give one last example, which is environmental racism. And so large language models consume a lot of resources. And this was a whole point of contention when we wrote this at Google. They were like, well, our data centers are carbon neutral, blah, blah, blah. But, even if your data centers are carbon neutral, you still cutting down trees to create, certain types of renewable energy, etc. So they're still consuming a lot of resources. And then, and we know that climate change exacerbates conflict, right? And then, but at the same time, those who consume the most resources are also those who benefit from large language models. So places like Ethiopia and Eritrea, for which the language does not even exist in this language technology, are also the hardest hit from climate change, being near the equator. And so if we look at the conflict in Tigray, many parts of Tigray were struggling with locust invasion because of climate change right before the conflict. Eritrea has gotten progressively drier, and Ertra has one of the highest migration rates in the world. All the people you hear about drowning in the Mediterranean, all those people you hear about, all those migrants, most of them are Eritrean. It's a country of maybe 5-6 million people, but it supplies the highest group of quote unquote migrants, right? In 2017, it was second only to Syria. So this current conflict that I'm talking about is creating a huge market for human trafficking. And this huge market creates, so for example, people go through Libya, they get kidnapped, they get tortured, and the people ask families for ransom, at least $20,000 per person. People can't afford $20,000 per person. And then those who are lucky enough to migrate are met with xenophobia, which is again expressed on social media, which is again what is used to train these large language models that we use everywhere. So if you're interested in understanding, I mean, if you have the heart to watch, there's this film called Sound of Torture. It's a documentary called Sound of Torture about Eritreans who were migrating in 2013. And actually it's dedicated to a person named Timnit, who my name, but she was killed in the torture, and so that's why it's dedicated to her. But just to understand the level of what people deal with. So on the one hand, Eritreans have used social media to connect with each other, have a different narrative from the 100% state-controlled media, and organize on behalf of their people, right? So this is actually the PhD thesis of Abraham Zera, who was a journalist when he was in Ertra. He was in an underground prison for many years. He escaped. He's now in the States, and he talks about social media and how it was used by activists, diaspora activists. This is literally from yesterday. These are these refugees in Libya right now that are being targeted by government, raids. The refugees are currently in Libya targeted by many raids from the authorities. So this is a letter that they posted on Twitter, right? And so they wouldn't have been able to have this direct access to us if they didn't have these platforms. This is from just right now. I looked this up right before I gave this talk, and this is exactly what's happening. They're basically kind of trying to raise awareness about what they're dealing with and expose atrocities. And this is a queer rights activist in the Ethiopian diaspora. They founded an organization, and they were saying that for them, even though they're harassed and get death threats and everything on social media, for them, they were saying that they think that they've been able to have a voice from these platforms. On the other hand, we know some of the issues that these platforms are proliferating, and they're just being held not accountable at all, and especially in the places that are not considered important. Like Sophie Chang said, if they don't think that there is a PR issue that comes from it, they don't do anything. So this is a quote from Mahdi, who was talking about how it's great that everybody talks about a ban of Frankenstein drones, right? This is an example of a drone that operated without a human operator and like hunted down a person, which is obviously very scary. But he says that social media algorithms have more deaths on their hands through medical disinformation and warmongering, which I'm seeing it in my own, I guess, places that I considered home. So I don't really have anything to say except that, this was the thing on my mind when I wrote the paper that I refused to retract without further conversation. It wasn't just, out of the blue or whatever. And so that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today, because mostly because this is something that's really important for me that I'm extremely worried about, that I don't feel like we've been talking enough about. And so I'll hand it off to Ruha. I see something about borders, so I'm actually very excited to hear your talk.
All right, Ruha, are you all set? Okay, cool. Ruha Benjamin.
All right. Thanks for your patience, everyone. And yes, there's so many resonances with what Timnit just shared. So let me begin. I've titled my comments, Borders, Bits, and Blackness. Horrible, shocking, heartbreaking. These were some of the reactions to photographs and videos showing US Border Patrol corralling Haitian migrants attempting to cross the Rio Grande into the United States in fall 2021. The agents straddled horses, wielding whips and shouting expletives in scenes that seemed to evoke a prior era of racial slavery. Social media erupted with charges of racism at the routine dehumanization of Black, Latinx, and Indigenous migrants, as compared to the border crossers coming into the country from Canada or those entering the country by plane, including the recent arrival of Afghan refugees. One group is being met with food, cheers, places to live, etc., which is what welcoming looks like. And the other group is being met with cowboys with leather straps or ropes and detention by force, said Nana Gyamfi, the daughter of Ghanaian immigrants and executive director of Black Alliance for Just Immigration. On Instagram, I scrolled past vintage drawings of slave catchers in the 1800s, juxtaposed with this recent footage of border police hovering over the drenched bodies of families carrying their belongings in trash bags. Scrolling further, one friend posted a video of Joe Biden in a 1994 PBS interview with Charlie Rose, in which Biden says, if Haiti just quietly sunk into the Caribbean or rose 300 feet into the air, it wouldn't matter a whole lot in terms of our interests. Another friend posted the words of poet Worston Shire. You have to understand, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. The Biden administration knows the land is unsafe for those in Haiti. It acknowledged the dire conditions in the country earlier in the year when the administration announced that Haitians already living in the US were eligible for temporary protected status, TPS, but new arrivals seeking asylum need not apply. Instead, the administration proceeded to expel migrants crossing in from Mexico, many of whom had been residing in South America since 2010, since the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. Now they were being sent back to a country experiencing political violence and ongoing humanitarian disasters. For Allison Parker, US Managing Director at Human Rights Watch, the US government showed a total disregard for the right to seek asylum when it sent agents on horsebacks with reins flailing to control and deter this largely Black migrant population. This violent treatment of Haitians at the border is just the latest example of racially discriminatory, abusive, and illegal US border policies that are returning people to harm and humanitarian disaster, said Parker. True. But what I'd like to emphasize today is that it's not only border agents on horseback that make the scene violent. It's borders, period. These political constructions are tools that perpetuate global inequalities and premature death. For political geographer Rhys Jones, the existence of the border itself produces the violence that surrounds it. By refusing to abide by a wall, map, property line, identity document, or legal regime, mobile people upset the state's schemes of exclusion, control, and violence. They do this simply by moving, says Jones. This latest spectacle of border violence against Haitian migrants captured widespread attention, perhaps because it falls on the most obvious end of a carceral continuum that seeks to contain racialized populations in the name of public safety and public health. But what of the more insidious end of this continuum? Already, the Dominican Republic is employing a digital ID system that discriminates against those of Haitian descent. And as Eve Calif explains in this new book, DR balked at pressure to recognize the national status of persons of Haitian ancestry and retroactively strip tens of thousands of persons of Haitian descent of their Dominican citizenship. As with the uptake of digital IDs around the world, the state lauds these technologies as more effective way to ensure citizens get access to public goods and services. In practice, ease and inclusion for the privileged rest on discrimination and exclusion for already marginalized populations. In terms of Black technoscience and how we as a community engage with these developments, I think our task is not only to critique or even suggest tweaks to the technology in order to make them less biased, but to address the socio-political conditions that give rise to scarcity and surveillance in the first place. Moreover, I think what we do well, is connect obvious forms of political harm and social discrimination with these more diffuse tools and techniques, immigrant databases, digital IDs, and electronic tracking systems, to name a few. For all the talk of smart borders, which use the latest in biometric face verification, aerial drones, and data fusion centers, borders are just becoming more sophisticated sites of racialized surveillance, displacement, and death. Smartness in this sense harkens back to the eugenic underpinnings of both artificial and organic intelligence and its primary directive: to categorize and rank humans, eradicating those deemed worthless while protecting the interests of those judged worthy. Like the flood of images depicting Haitian migrants determined to find refuge, Black technoscience is called on to hold a mirror up to the everyday violence of borders that rarely captures public attention, much less outrage. We must draw attention to the policies and technologies that governments and companies are deploying quietly and viciously, tearing into people's lives, ripping families apart, and hunting down the most vulnerable, one computer bit at a time. The power of these technologies rests on a false assertion of neutrality. They count on us believing that they're more objective, more humanitarian even, than a scowling border agent wielding a whip. But of course, there are many types of violence, some spectacular and swift, others quiet and methodical. Note that on January 20, 2021, his first day in office, President Biden issued an executive order pausing the remaining construction of the southern border wall initiated during the Trump administration. Soon after, the White House sent a bill to Congress, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, calling for the development of, quote, smart technology to manage and secure the southern border. In a report issued just this week, which I strongly encourage everyone to read, the Immigrant Defense Project traces this relationship between wall building, global inequality, and climate change, showing how although the rhetoric of smart borders emerged in the aftermath of 9/11, the use of technology by US border agencies is not new. As early as 1919, the US government deployed armed aerial surveillance and reconnaissance of the border region. However, contemporary smart borders are unique in the seeming sophistication of the technologies they embody, the scope of the personal data they're able to collect, and the integration of these systems with one another. They're also more extensively used within and beyond the United States. This is reflected in the increasingly global presence of Custom and Border Patrol with 23 offices outside the US, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement with 48 offices globally. And just as I've argued in my own work for abolitionist tools that counter tech-mediated anti-Blackness in the US, that is the new Jim Code, we also have to question and organize against high-tech border imperialism that harms racialized people globally. Towards that end, the Immigrant Defense Project report argues that we must move beyond a narrow debate limited to hard versus soft borders towards a discussion of how we can move towards a world where all people have the support needed to lead healthy, secure, and vibrant lives. A just border policy would ask questions such as, how do we help create conditions that allow people to stay in the places they call home and to thrive wherever they reside? When people do have to move, how can we ensure they're able to do so safely? When we take these questions as our starting point, we realize that it's not enough to fix a quote broken system. Rather, we need to reimagine the system entirely. And as I see it, Black technoscience communities offer key insights and tools for that reimagining. And when I say reimagining, I mean that literally, employing creative tools to subvert the racist status quo. As when architect Ronald Rael imagines binational libraries where people share information and knowledge, where the border becomes nothing more than a bookshelf, or his design of a teeter-totter, where the actions on one side have a direct consequence on what happens on the other side. As Rael implores, the wall is cutting through people's lives. And so he redesigned this well-known caution traffic sign showing a family of migrants crossing the road with a small tweak in which the family is running towards one another. It's a reminder for me that not only must we critique the world as it is, but reimagine it for what it could be. With that, thank you for your attention.
Hi, thank you. So do you guys want to talk to each other first?
I just can't believe, like, we didn't talk at all before our presentations and
Mind meld, mind meld.
you know?
Okay, sisters, just different.
Yeah.
So I know that you've got things that you want to say to each other. I'm just going to start doing a little bit of weaving here. Carceral continuum, borders, cultural and linguistic, illegibility, deep fakes, digital ID, electric tracking systems, eugenics is shaping statistics. How we count things continues to track all of those violences. And yet, particularly Ruha's evoking of refusal, reimagining, and remake, the question that I would just ask you guys to continue to open up more, because it's implicit in the work that you presented. How are you, either in your own work or are you seeing in the world, kind of managing the space between the critical audit, the correcting of racist technologies, and the generation of new possibilities, of new space?
Yeah, I can jump in just because it dovetails exactly from the Immigrant Defense Project. I put the report in the chat for folks to look at, but you know, one of the main ways that I've been trying to, what I think of as integrate a critical and creative approach to technoscience is one, through teaching. So I think all teaching is creative work, and teaching not just in the four walls of a classroom, but public education, popular education, all of that. So I think that is a site in which criticality and creativity often go hand in hand, but specifically in the last year through the Ida B. Wells Just Data Lab, working with students beyond the classroom, what we do is we're partnering with organizations, including we partnered with the Immigrant Defense Project on research that the organization conceives of as meaningful to their advocacy and to movement building. And then students work with the organizations and teams around that. And so if you go to the Just Data Lab website and look at the projects, you'll get a little flavor of what that looks like in terms of pedagogy and research. But more recently, right now, this semester, the lab is doing for the first time, like the entire lab is working on a project, not just in teams. And what the description of our project is reimagining safety. And so essentially what it is so we know that crime data is routinely weaponized against Black communities. So the question for us now is, what does it mean to create community well-being data, or to create a framework, even if we say it's not even data that we need, but articulate a framework in which it's proactively describing what it means to feel safe, not through policing, but what we actually need to create life-affirming context. And in the process, students are interviewing abolitionists throughout the country as part of that reimagining, and creating this framework that then can be used essentially so that we can at the same time say crime data and criminalization, we're against that and we need to dismantle that. And then in its place, what do we want to foster, and how do we count it? How do we look for it? How do we know when we've created it? And so I will just invite people to probably join us. We'll probably have a public roundtable in January based on our findings. Right now, the students are interviewing abolitionists to create this community well-being data. And you can think of it, I mean, the closest thing you can kind of think of it is kind of like the happiness index, you know, that you hear the global happiness index, but it's really thinking at the local level, what it means to foster a sense of safety and well-being that does not rely on policing.
You know, I always love how Ruha's always reimagine. I'm very highly influenced by that, because I don't tend to do that. I don't tend to reimagine. I really appreciate how you always tell us to talk about what is it that so if we say no to this, what is it that we want to say yes to, right? That's a bit difficult, because sometimes there's the long term and the short term, and sometimes when you're working on the short term, it can be hard to kind of take a step back and think about the long term, right? For example, like in my talk about social media and what's happening in Eritrea right now, etc., we're so worried about right now, what's happening right now. The refugees are right now in Libya. They're right now getting, arrested. The journalists are right now not doing that. So like we need to protect them, and the war is happening right now, the migration. So it's sometimes very difficult to take a step back and think about the future. Same with Mahdi, for example. I was telling him, he has done so much research out of necessity, not because this was fun, but because his friends and colleagues are imprisoned, and he was one of the targets of the Pegasus software, that we just heard about. And so he's constantly trying to he was working on actually helping this specific journalists, trying to get their trying to make sure that they're not in prison, but they are. And so I guess I don't really know. We need more people working on it. We need more time, because we can't, it's so difficult to work on the specifics right now, and also time to think about, oh, what do we want in place, right? What do we need to do in place? So I don't know how to create more of that, more time, so that each of us can focus on a little bit of now and a lot of in the future, or something like that. Because when we're always just under attack and we're constantly thinking about now, we don't get to reimagine. We don't get to think about, okay, what do we want in place of this thing that we're currently, trying to stop. So that's sort of kind of, what's on my mind, right? When we're talking about, for example, these social media, large language models, whatever, it's so difficult for me to think about, okay, what is an alternative thing that I want in place, in place of what's happening right now. I'm more thinking about, how do I deplatform some of these horrible people that are, causing a lot of harm? How do I stop these, my friends and family from being under, I don't know, how do I raise awareness? And so how can we create more, how can we give ourselves more time to think about the future, is what I'm thinking about right now. And I'm so amazed. Ruha is so good at doing both all the time. I'm not sure
No,
how
but
you
you know,
do
but
it.
you notice, like, for me, the answer to that is that I can't do all of that. Like,
Yeah.
literally, that's why my goal is to mentor 100 students every year to take over. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, it's the kind of thing where even a few people can't, it's not possible. So part of it, I think, going back to this being a research network sponsored event and about a Black technoscience community, I think we really have to think about cultivating community, grow the network, you know, grow the number of researchers and practitioners working in this area, because that's one of the keys to being able to work on multiple fronts. Like, we can't all do everything, but we need everything. We need to be, you know, working on different fronts. And so, yeah, it's not at all a testimony to me, but just about setting up a structure which to cultivate that potential and capacity in others, especially students.
The questions are starting to roll in. Do you want to start hearing questions, or do you want a little bit more conversation?
I'm not sure. Why don't we hear questions to let other people be part of the conversation too?
Okay, great. And Tina, when is Jan LeCun going to figure out he needs to stop tweeting?
That was another time I had a whole issue. So this is the thing. It's, you know,
That's right.
when to engage and when not to engage is always an issue. The first time I engaged with him, I then started getting death threats and all this stuff too. Like I had a whole thing. So he doesn't have to. That's the thing. He just gets to do that. You know, he's not held accountable.
Yeah.
And he's one of the reason I wanted to talk about him is that he's the person setting the agenda for the whole field.
Right. Right. So if Obama's rendered white, hey, that's just the data set. Let's take it to Senegal and we'll get a different outcome. Here's a question for Reginald Royston. How does the framework concept of fugitivity play into these concepts? Are there places of Black sovereignty that we can utilize in these efforts at Google scale?
I don't know, Ruha, do you have that?
I mean, I had a response up until the Google scale.
Yeah, I don't know about.
I mean, part of it, I mean, anytime we have conversations about scale, part of my thinking is that bigness is not always good. Like you know, you always get the question, how do we scale this up? And for me, sometimes it's like, no, we don't. Like I think finding also that fugitivity and sovereignty, like localized, specific, organic, you know, sites of it. And I can point to some of those. That's partly what I've been writing about over the last year for this next book. And so, you know, I think of something like Cooperation Jackson, which is a collective of cooperatives in Jackson, Mississippi, predominantly Black city, that includes a makerspace. It includes technological sort of infrastructure. It includes a community garden. It includes housing. It includes recycling. You know, so many different dimensions of it. And you know, I don't think the point is to scale that up, but to foster that potential of Black cooperatives in many different places that will take on its own regional and local flavor. And so at the same time, when we question and we push back against the harms produced by big tech, it's not just the tech part perhaps, but the big part too, the monopolization, that we don't necessarily want our version, the social justice version of Google. And so I would encourage us to look. And I think it also is liberating when you start looking down and you see, you know, in different communities, actually there's a proliferation of experiments and community building and things that we can learn from and we can adapt. And so to that query, this is exactly, I think, what I've been looking at now and I'm writing about, which, and that this focus, this book will come out next year on this.
There's a question from Lucy Suchman. Thank you for these powerful talks. A question particularly for Timnit. Do we really need LLM? Do you see an abolitionist path with respect to these and related data-driven infrastructures?
I'm not sure if we need large language models. So in our paper, what we wrote, I don't know about the answer. I don't know if the answer is exactly no or really, I can't, definitely not yes, but I can't say yes, we need them. But like what we were trying to do in our paper really is the most basic things, is saying we should ask the question, do we really need these tools, and why do we really need them? And really, so I know that's very basic, but we were trying to get to an audience that completely assumes that the assumption that this is inevitable and it's there and we need the scale, like Ruha was saying, this scale thing is completely, the assumption, it's not even questioned. Of course we need scale. Of course, you know, we need to have that kind of data. So I'm not convinced that we absolutely need it. And the fact is that I think that I'm not convinced that the the benefits outweigh the harms. So, so the question is, you know, what exactly is language technology being used for, and what uses are the ones that we want to keep? And how do we tailor, you know, the research to that, right? And right now, all research on language technology is basically completely dominated by these large language models. And my view is that if we started from the question of what task are we trying to accomplish and why, I'm not sure if we would have gotten to the large language models part, because if it wasn't so dominated by big tech companies that have as much compute as possible and all the data, whatever, I think that alternative methodologies might have come forward. So that was the conversation we were hoping to spark in this paper, you know, just that, like, the fact that we should ask this question of, do we need these large language models to start with?
Here's a question from Marcelo Castro. Ruha, as you look to partner with governments and other stakeholders to address techno-racist issues, how to overcome the theoretical and practical difference and contradictions to coordinate political economy-focused interest?
Yeah, if I am interpreting it correctly, my own sort of approach to this is actually not to formally partner with governments or companies. And so you'll notice when you visit the lab website that all of our partners have a shared critique of racial capitalism and are working towards police and prison abolition, and have a shared orientation around the political economy in which technology is currently designed and how we might want and how we would want to imagine it. So as of now, I have been, I have not taken offers to partner with entities that I think there is that fundamental contradiction where this pursuit of profit, the pursuit of, even when we think about private-public partnerships, the pursuit of profit tends to trump other values, other social values that I hold dear and that I try to infuse in my work and my pedagogy. So the answer is that I don't actually pursue those. And so I think everyone needs to figure that out for themselves in terms of where they are able to work and what kinds of partnerships they're able to sort of ethically, politically co-sign. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Timnit, you've made also the observation that the university is not exactly safe haven either. I mean,
no. That's why I didn't want to. So when I got fired, a lot of people were like, well, what, you obviously don't have academic freedom in a company. You should have gone to academia. I'm like, I was in academia. I dealt with so much. I mean, that, I mean, I haven't really spoken up publicly about it, but I don't think there's academic freedom in academia. There's academic freedom for some people, and others get it if they're lucky and they have a good advisor or whatever. But most people, contingent workers, postdocs, students, etc., you know, the people, immigrants with visa issues, that's dangled, right? Like, oh, if you don't do as I say, then look, we're not going to renew your visa. So, and I was saying that from what I understand, academia is second only to the military in terms of sexual harassment. So, you know, from what I saw in a lot of, in my space, the incentives to do long-term research in AI and computer science, the publications are so fast. Like every few months, someone has to write a new paper, and in academia too, that's the incentive, right? Structure. So yeah, so there's no way I was gonna go back. I was gonna go back to that. So I don't know. I'm hoping to create, you know, another incentive structure with an independent research institute, but it's never really truly independent. Like, you know, I'm thinking about that right now. Like the first set of amount of money that we raised is from foundations. You know, like the foundations with the old dead white guys who are doing whatever we're talking about right now. And then I don't want to be beholden to them either. And so I'm thinking about, okay, how can we have additional revenue streams and things like that? But it's, you know, it's something that I'm really thinking about. It kind of worries me because you're not really truly independent, and you have to think about exactly what Ruha said. Like, what are you okay with? What are you not okay with? So each person has to make that decision.
I've got a question from Banu Subramaniam. Clarifying question for Professor Jabru. Clearly companies are purposefully not shutting down.
I'm not a professor. Thank you for, you know, that's Ruha. I haven't earned that title yet, so.
We'll just call you doctor.
Doctor.
Do you have the technology to fully shut down hate groups should they choose to? In other words, is it about their political will, or even if they do, is it still tough to keep track of proliferating fake sites and bots?
I think in my view, the first one as well, because as Sophie Chang said, if they don't feel like it's gonna create, you know, a PR disaster, the amount that they spend is so little in my view. And if they spent what I think is the amount that they should spend, the amount of resources and people and everything, first of all, it is complex. I'm not saying it's not complex. That's one of the things I wanted to show in my talk, is that there's an interplay of, you know, political actors, infiltration, the automated stuff is hard, you know, the context that you need to know. But even past that, there's clear genocidal speech proliferated every. I take screenshots and try to send it to people and stuff, and they don't do anything about it. And I think if they spent the amount of resources that they should spend, they probably make their profit margin would be this much, because they would have to spend so much of their, you know, money and efforts to try to keep us safe. To me, that's at the crux of it. So if they're not forced to do that, they just won't, because again, the profit, wanting to make profit at the cost of everything else trumps it. So for example, in the Moroccan situation, when Mahdi was trying to talk to people at Twitter, or no, Facebook, people were saying, oh, they're so focused on the US elections, which is true. They should be focused on the US elections. But he's Moroccan. his people are going to jail there. People are getting harassed. So if you have a platform that's making money from Morocco, that's operating in Morocco, you can't tell him, you know, sorry, you have to wait in line because we're focusing on the US elections. That's not okay in my view. They need to have the same they need to have people also focusing in Morocco, because that's urgent for him, for his family, for, you know, his colleagues. So this is what I have seen. I mean, time and time again, there is such clear stuff. Like when I said, I gave an example, September 20th, that was a few days ago, right? this is after, the Facebook whistleblower, I forgot her name, Francis. She talked about Ethiopia in the hearing. So this is now, and even still, we can point to specific pages and that have not been taken down. They're still there, that have been inciting violence very, very clearly. So I think if they really wanted to, absolutely they would, absolutely. But they are not forced. They're not gonna do it at the cost of their profit, and there's nothing that forces them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook spends millions of dollars keeping Facebook clean already. So just to follow up on that, Ish, Ed Nutting asks, are some AI data modeling technologies being driven only by the need to tackle the problems of having one company with too much data power, a single network too large for them to handle? If we limit the size of any single company's user base, would the need for some of these technologies disappear, along with many of the far more damaging problems they cause? And Ed is running Midspace, our open source platform for us. He's one of the designers.
I don't know
Ruha,
the
do you have
answer.
something?
I don't quite know the answer to the second question, but to the first, what it made me think of is that there are a number of bills, 5 or 6 of them currently being proposed in the US that are around antitrust bills that are targeting the various ways in which these monopolies are affecting workers, affecting quote users or customers. And so this particular issue in question is right now in the crosshairs and is a main focus of debate around the power and the harms associated with the bigness of tech. And so for those who haven't followed what's happening with that legislation, it's a good place to start.
In terms of, oh, sorry, I was going to say something about the models being driven by, so I think that there are some tenets that are being driven by this, for example, large and scale, and it's unclear why that would help anybody except for the large companies. And so the idea that you want to automate everything. So I can imagine, so for example, maybe the type of technology they were talking about is, automatic hate speech detection or something. I can still imagine some very rudimentary stuff that would be helpful. You're just never going to get the context, or it's just not, I can't imagine that. Even for people, you have to be experts in that space. And even then you have your own, political leanings and stuff like that. So I can't imagine any model catching that, but maybe there could be, some rudimentary things that would be helpful. But even those we've seen, how they've been flagging. I mean, there's all sorts of issues with those. Like, for example, if you have in terms of toxicity detection, we've shown, people in our team have shown just simple things. Like if you say, I am a man versus I am a gay man, the toxicity of the second sentence would be higher. The models would say the second sentence is more toxic than the first one, which it isn't. I am a gay man is a perfectly, it's not, it's a neutral sentence, right? So that's the kind of stuff they're using to detect, hate speech and things like that. So, so I think that, you can, I think that you can still have some rudimentary type, some rudimentary models that can detect these things. But what they're trying to do right now is there's this assumption, of course, we can't hire people and take care of them and make sure their mental health is okay. And we can't, moderate all of this content because of the scale of our company. So we're going to try to work on AI instead, right? That's an unquestioned assumption. The fact that they should have that scale, the fact that, obviously we can't moderate all the content, etc. And so I think that is a problem, right? That's a problem that has arrived because we've arrived at that problem because of the scale and because of the monopoly and because of the fact that they're trying to make as much money as possible with as few, resource by expending as few resources as possible. So So yes, in a way, I think that some of the research into these models, automated models, is definitely driven by them wanting to make as much money as possible without hiring, more people, or hire as few people as possible, make as much profit as possible.
I'm going to go to Sigal Gilead's question. My question for both the panelists is, currently in my studies, the theory of decolonizing the fields of anthropology and archaeology as practiced in Canada is being taught. So my question, which I think is very similar to the processes you are trying to combat, how do you begin the process of decolonizing something when the colonialism is still going?
Mhm. I mean, yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's actually useful to point to the ongoing nature of these systems rather than think of them historically, something that happened in the past. And so pedagogically, what it means is, tracing those histories, but actually looking at how the universe, like looking at the curriculum now, looking at what's being assigned, looking at what is considered extra, on top of the canonical, on top of what's required. And so it's precisely the continuity, the fact that we can point to it, yet something that happened yesterday as a colonial aspect of our educational system, that I think is powerful in terms of the dismantling, because it's something that affects you in the present. And so I don't necessarily see it as, it's not, I don't perceive it as a challenge, but as an opportunity to actually make relevant what the struggle is, because it continues to affect and infect our institutions and our everyday experiences, navigating, whether it's academia, the tech industry, our neighborhoods and communities, et cetera.
I would say for me, the works of Ruha and Simone Brown and others have, Sophia Noble and everybody, has been extremely useful, because when even as someone, Ertra is like a place that's colonized by the Italians, and my mom was telling me, like, all of the things that they learned are about, they had to memorize the European rivers in World War II and all of that, rather than learning about their surroundings, like Eritrea and the other African, countries in the region, etc. That's kind of, the ongoing nature of colonialism. But even being aware of all of that, I definitely did not connect technology to the ongoing nature of colonialism, or any of the other things we're talking about. I had to, and I wasn't, exposed to the scholarship of the people who are doing that. And I guess that's because of the ongoing nature of colonialism, right? If it wasn't, then, I would be learning a very different approach to, how to develop technology. So I agree with Ruha that it's very important to remember the ongoing nature of colonialism, and to kind of make sure that we are all aware of how, the first thing I try to do is decolonize myself and my thoughts and my approach, right? And so I think understanding the ongoing nature helps, even in our conversations, or when we're teaching, or when we're talking about our work, it helps us understand how current technology that we're building is contributing to this ongoing nature of colonialism, like the borders that Ruha was talking about, the electronic borders, and trying to keep people out. For me, Eritreans were colonized by Italy, and right now Eritreans are dying trying to get to Italy, right? They're dying through the Mediterranean trying to get there. And this mayor, who actually helped migrants in Italy, Italian mayor, they just sentenced him to like 13 years in prison. And so I actually think it's very useful to frame that as the ongoing nature of colonialism, right? Because they stole all of these resources, they killed millions of people, and they're still doing that, right? Because they have all the wealth there, they have all these borders, and the people from the places that they colonize are trying to reach to reach there. But that's not how we talk about the migrant crisis or the border or whatever. Like we're not talking about it as a consequence of colonialism.
There was also a question from Vic Gardenhire about what kind of support and help can kind of a gathering like ours offer in this. So this is I think a material aid question.
What kind of support?
Yeah, like what kind of help?
I think that it's good to learn from, I'm not sure. I mean, for me, I think it's good to hear from, other people's perspectives and use it in your kind of understanding of the situation, and kind of see how you can apply it to your own context, right? For me, the fact that Ruha was talking about borders, and connecting it to her work, and we didn't even have a conversation about it, gets me to learn more about the issue that I really care about. And I'm now reading, the Smart Borders or A Humane World. I haven't read that. And then I get to see how I can incorporate it into my practice. So that's how, and create a network among people who are similarly concerned about similar things. So that's how I see it. I see it as kind of knowledge building and network building.
Rohan Hildbrand-Chup asks, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about similarities, differences, and relationships between border technologies and social media platforms, especially the tensions regarding the goals of reform and expanding who's included versus the goals of abolition or breaking up larger platform companies.
I mean, I like the question, and I like it's kind of drawing our two talks together and the different types of technologies that we sort of scanned in this hour. The one of the differences that I see is, as Timnit alluded to towards the end, is that social media has the potential for connection and recognition and representation. It offers that, as well as all the harms that are associated with this idea that what you have access to has access to you. Whereas I don't see the upside of borders and border technologies. And so for me, there's a clear case for abolition in that case, in terms of border technologies and borders generally. Whereas I think there's more ambiguity when it comes to social media and its use by social movements to build critical connections and attention and outrage. And so that's a distinction that I think would lead to different strategies when it comes to the way that we engage them and use them.
There's a question from Science World. Thank you for the powerful work. When I think of Jackson, I think of the radical tradition from which Mayor Chowaki Lumumba and his father drew inspiration. Can you speak to the role of radical social movements in the kinds of resistance that give you hope? Also, I think of Rhea Ramus' third book on anarchist resistance, and remember that she was denied tenure. So is this a fraught hope?
Yeah, to the first part, in terms of Jackson, certainly that sort of initiative and those like it is really one of the only things that give me hope. That is, those who continue to work in the tradition of Black freedom struggles. And so whether we're talking about contemporary ones, but also looking to the past, you know, and usually in longer versions of my talks, I always point to the relationship between data struggles now and what Du Bois started, what Ida B. Wells started, and their critique of the weaponization of data, but also the fact that they also had a kind of faith in data. Like they were also trying to produce data that was life affirming, that was recognizing the humanity of Black people. And so I think it's really important for us to not just trace those continuities, but to allow them to guide us and fuel our work. There's a there's a sign hanging in my office here that says, we can each of us do the impossible as long as we can convince ourselves that it's been done before, by Octavia Butler. And so I do encourage those who, very understandably feel disillusioned, disheartened, by the current, the status quo, to find those touchstones in which people push through that and use that as a kind of beacon in your work, whatever that may be.
I have a question. We have feminist data, we've got queer data, we've got Black data. Can the two of you speak a little bit about, and you can refuse these namings, but Black feminist decolonial critique across situated positionalities? I mean, can you help give some insights in terms of, we see these kind of alt datas showing up, and almost always they speak to, and I'm embracing my other alt data people, but do you have a sense of that?
I don't know. I mean, I can say a bit more kind of following up on what Ruha was saying, right? Using critiquing and contesting data, right? Like, and working towards your privacy, etc. But then at the same time using it to expose some of the issues we're dealing with, or using it to support, to help ourselves, right? One of the things in terms of language technology I was reading about was people in New Zealand, the Maori, who generated their own data for speech recognition using local radio stations, and they kept it. Some American company wanted to buy it from them, but they kept it. They want to use it for language revitalization of their own communities. They didn't want to sell it to another company. They were like, these are the same people who beat the language out of our grandparents. So we're not going to do, colonization again. But it's not like they're completely rejecting this technology, which in sometimes, of course, refusal is the answer. But in this case, they were saying, okay, we're going to use this tool as a way to revitalize our language, and we want to make sure that it's done in a way that helps our communities, that supports our communities. So I guess this is similar to some of the other things you talked about, but indigenous, right? Indigenous data. So those are some of the things that come to mind when I think of, Black feminist queer data, decolonial, theory, things like that. This is one example that came to mind.
Ruha, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's good. Thank you.
Pretty good, right? Natalie Raha asks, can we get involved in joining, supporting your work from a social and or tech research perspective? Can we have more direction to your labs, AI institutions in the building, and how to connect? I've been interested in finding a community to leverage tackling these problems and long-term innovation capital and innovation building. Interested to understand opportunities available to get involved with your work, Dr. Jabru and Ruha.
So I would just direct you to the resources tab on my personal website, which will actually sort of inventory a number of organizations and initiatives to plug into. One of which is a kind of umbrella organization, the purpose of which is to connect people who have this desire to plug in, where it connects technologists, policy advocates, community organizers, in different initiatives, and that's Data for Black Lives. So I would encourage you to check them out and attend the next conference and plug into the network. There are various regional chapters or some of the other organizations there. At the moment, my lab is a student-centered lab for students at my institution, and we partner with community organizations. And so that's the scale of it right now, and we're not branching out at the moment. But for those who want to plug in, I would suggest, getting involved with some of the organizations that I list on the resources tab.
I think,
Many,
oh, sorry. I was going to add, in terms of organizations, there's also Black in AI, Queer in AI, Disabilities in AI, Indigenous in AI. This reminds me of the scale discussion we were having earlier, that even when we want to scale something, it's very good to start local and specific. Because, for example, with Black in AI, we started Black in AI, and now we have Queer in AI, Indigenous in AI, and all of these, Latinx in AI, all of these different organizations. There's also Black in X, Black in Neuro, Black in, so I think that even when we want to scale something, it's good to think local and small. And so in that sense, in terms of supporting our work, I would think, you can join one of these organizations if you think that they'll be supportive to you, and join a network. And I would love to see more independent institutions. I think we don't need like one big, lab or one big institution. So if there is a way we can support the creation of just many more organizations, many more different types of organizations, I think that would be basically supporting my work for me, in my view, because that supports my goals as well.
Cora Olson asks, to what extent do you both envision solidarity across racial lines to make more just livable worlds, borders, and social mediascapes? What does that solidarity look like, or might look like?
Yeah, and I put a little note in the chat in response that I think it entails those who are in positions of power and privilege asking those who are most harmed by emerging technologies or other socio-technical systems, what does solidarity look like to them? So I don't think it's something that should be or could be prescribed through a panel like this or through one or two individuals. But a concrete example that I put in the chat is for white collar tech workers to ask Amazon workers that are in the warehouses, what would solidarity look like in your drive to unionize that Amazon is trying to squash? Rather than me telling you what that is, actually asking the people who are on the ground fighting against these algorithmic overlords, what would it look like for us to actually support your unionization, even as we know that the Alphabet Workers Union has been galvanizing since the beginning of the year. And so that hopefully is a concrete example of where you might start.
Can I follow up on that in terms of isolation and people being picked off? Certainly, we had a strong example of that with Timnit's experience at a giant company that says it wants to do important work on AI and ethics.
Well, I mean, I think this solidarity that you're talking about helped me. I mean, another way to look at it is that I think at another time, regardless of how much we fought or whatever, they would have destroyed my career, destroyed my reputation, that's, no matter what, they would have been able to do that, right? And so that there's a lot of people for whom they do that too right now who don't have that type of visibility and solidarity. So I think actually this is a good example of how solidarity across racial lines, class lines, etc., is really important. And even, for example, the people who were fired from Google before were organizing on my behalf. So current and former Google workers. And then across companies too, there's people talking to each other. Google, Apple, you see the Apple II movement now, Apple and other groups of people in terms of across class lines too, right? Like I work, there's Adrienne is somebody, I forgot her last name, I really admire at Amazon. She's organizing on behalf of so many different groups of people. So I guess yes, they isolated me and did that to me, but if I didn't have this community, they could have done a lot more than they did, right? I've also seen, I was gonna say, like, I think what Ruha said about asking people, the most impacted, what they need is really important, because I have seen these transnational solidarity go are like wrong too. You know, I mean, I can give so many examples there, but it's very disheartening when that happens. So I think it's really important to not make assumptions about what we know and what people need, and just make sure that we're learning from the people on the ground, the movements on the ground. One example I can give is Cuba, right? The protests in Cuba, where many of them were done by Black Cubans, like, you know, the San Isidro movement and stuff like that. Can give similar examples in Eritrea and Ethiopia. And so it's just very important to listen to the people who are leading the movements on the ground.
One thing I'll just footnote, again, I put a link there for those who want to learn more, is after 2 Black women were fired or pushed out of Pinterest, we learned that because of non-disclosure, signing non-disclosure agreements, you could speak out against sex-based discrimination that is revealed, but you could not reveal the content, the specifics about race-based discrimination. And they fought this. And just in the last few weeks in California, a new law has been passed called Silence No More, that makes it harder for companies to try to silence those who've experienced harassment and abuse. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was 2 Black women and their experience and persistence that actually has created an environment which will, I think, positively impact others who undergo
And these 2 Black women did a lot on my behalf.
Yes.
Erica and Ifeoma did a lot on my behalf. So like Erica galvanized the Congress letter, the letter that they sent to Google, that was Erica galvanizing people in Congress. And Ifeoma was doing a lot. So again, like this network across different groups of people in solidarity has been very helpful to me, even though it may seem like, yes, they isolated me, but they could have done a lot more damage.
Yes.
So we've got maybe one more question, and then we probably all need to go recharge, because this is beautiful, energetic output, and we got to take care. So this is from Laura Meek. Thank you for these incredible talks. And again, there's lots and lots of notes that are just thank you, and in different languages. So we're all saying thank you. I'd like to ask if you see at this moment an opening for renewed activist academic collaboration between US Black studies and continental African efforts to disrupt racial capitalism, example, Bayo, Ako, Molafe, and others.
What's interesting is one of the biggest regrets for me, things that got canceled for the pandemic, was a conference that Timnit organized in Ethiopia that I think it partly really exemplifies this. Maybe you could talk about that
Yeah, I
conference.
was gonna say that for me, it was, for example, in thinking about Black and AI, it was extremely important to establish those diasporic movements across the continent and the African diaspora. And that was very important for many reasons. But for example, there's all of this, you know, African American divide that people talk about, right? And that's because our conversations, in my view anyways, our conversations and our views of each other are mediated by white supremacy, white media, right? Not each other. Our experiences are extremely similar in many ways, but there's this mediation that happens. And so I think it's really important to have that solidarity and networks. And so for me, the way I've been trying to do that, for example, is, you know, understanding that academics in the African continent many times don't get to talk about the African continent. All the people in these states get money to talk about whatever poverty in Africa or something like that. And so I was calling up some of my friends, some of my colleagues that I met because of these different organizations, whether it's Data Science Africa, Black AI, or Deep Learning Indaba is another one. Ruhat, you spoke there, right? You spoke at the Deep Learning Indaba in Nairobi.
Yeah.
And so I, you know, it was very important to meet people and make connections there. And we even have a collaboration. So one of the people I called in South Africa, I asked her, if you had unlimited money, unlimited resources, what would you work on? Right. And then she said, I would work on analyzing spatial apartheid, like the evolution of spatial apartheid using this data. So we started working on that. It was in 2017. We, I had a student, an amazing student who grew up in a township. So this project was like super, very important for her and very personal for her. At every step of the way, the white teachers in South Africa wanted to fail her. Like it was a whole thing. But I think having this cross, continental kind of collaboration, really, I think it was good for all of us. So I know that, I don't know, I mean, maybe Ruha, you can correct me, but when I talked to people in the 60s, they told me that this collaboration existed a lot more then. So when I talk to people from Ethiopia who came to the States, a lot of them were actually involved with the civil rights movement here. A lot of them were involved with Malcolm X and some other people, specifically Malcolm X, they told me. And then they went back to Ethiopia and many of them were killed, many of them were in prison. But like there was this, it spread, right? All of these movements spread and they had a lot more kind of connection. And so I'm hoping to see much more of that now. And I'm not sure if there is a renewal of it. I'm not as, well versed in history as obviously Ruha, but I know that I heard that there was a lot more of it in the 60s, and I'm hoping that we're having a resurgence of that now.
It's 4:40.
Ruha, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just clapping and putting in the chat, yes, a source on that history of Black internationalism for anyone who's interested. But yeah, I just really
cool.
appreciate your example too of that South Africa connection and the challenges of that. Thank you.
Okay, let's go drink some water, recuperate, and go build the rest of this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Beth. Thanks everyone behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.